Welcome, the smartest people in the room, and have this amazing conversation with our very special guest. I'm Barry, I'm the Director of Community Engagement here at BLUEBARN, and this is our panel on Erasure as it intersects with the themes of the play. And we have an amazing duo of special guests this evening. You may remember Dr. Peggy Jones from such recent BLUEBARN hits as Escaped Alone and all the top backs for Buffalo Women. But Dr. Peggy works at UNO in the theater department, is also a playwright and an actor and an amazing human being. And this is Fly Jamerson, playwright, partner to the set designer, also mother of a gorgeous baby, and an advocate and an activist in our community, recent transplant to our community.
The set looks exactly like the backyard of our house in Arizona.
So there you go. There you go.
Jason cheated.
There you go.
Just like, I could do the work, or I could just look outside
Exactly.
and design the set.
It's inspired, homage.
Excellent. So I will turn this over to them, and there'll be some time and space for interaction, questions from the audience and whatnot. But
Very much so.
bask in their brilliance.
Well, I'm going to start because this one always like blows me out of the water. So I think it's that. But seriously, they're the most amazing dramaturg that, mind you, it's not like I've gotten to be. He and they are amazing dramaturgs, and were it not for the dramaturgs in our world, what could we do? So I wanted to start with two little jokes because they leapt to mind based on just the beginning. I mean, I've read the play more than once, and but I was just watching an older, I think last season episode of Saturday Night Live, and they were doing an opening skit with Britney Spears was basically judging people for the cancel culture or not. And when Lil Nas X came out, and I don't remember the lead up to this joke, but essentially it was like, my people are country and rappers, so we all carry guns. We all carry guns, okay? Okay, so that was one thing that just made me want to laugh. And the other thing I wanted to ask you all, because it just took my brain and exploded it probably a few months before I read this play and was asked to participate. But and so some of you probably know this already. Maybe your brains won't be as blown as mine. But what percentage of our DNA of humans on the planet do you think we share in common? I just asked my students in one of my courses, and so it just blew me away. Yes.
I've gotten this wrong recently, so I'm going to say it's like 99.98%.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what.
99.98. Okay. So my students were saying things like 60, 65, 70. Some said 98. So it's 99.5. So I'm sure Barry was thinking, I know I'm going to get this time because it's 0.5% that makes us have any of these like the phenotype changes that we see with skin color, hair, eye color, the things, in other words, that we seem to, as human beings, struggle to find ways to get through the world with, and decide that in groups and out groups. I wish I had kept track of the times that the playwright wrote us and them, or we and them, had those in group, out groups. So I guess for me, I just have been still just so fixated on that 99.5% of us is the same, and then it's like infinitesimal how little we differ, yet here we are. As I tell my students, it's when you put people in the mix that things get kind of messed up. So that was one thing I just wanted to start us thinking about, how we are so we're so the same as humans, yet thinking of, like, notwithstanding that little joke I told, it's like, how seductive it seems to be, and I'm guessing how social psychologically we fall into, and worse, we hold dear to in-group, out-group kind of things that are based very much on just very strictly kind of visual / like I'd say like things that are observable. versus other ways. So that was kind of my little, what I wanted to kind of introduce us to think about. Neep.
I love this concept of the 0.5% difference, and specifically talking about the body. And I think that the first time I read the play, and then especially now having seen the play, and obviously this is the first time I saw the play, and it's nice to see something, right?
Yes.
And of course, experiencing live performance is so different, right? But I'm feeling very resonant with this idea of the body, and particularly resonant with and relating with a lot of what each of the individual characters had to say about their experiences of living inside of their body. And it's so interesting because you know, in the TGNC community, you know, the experience of gender dysphoria and body dysphoria is really physically, mentally, emotionally turbulent, right? And a lot of the ways that they're talking about the separation of the cerebral and visceral experience of the body and the soul, or even just like their like the concept of identity politics and their pain. Everyone's just in a lot of pain, right? Everybody's in a lot of pain, and it just is really. That's actually the end of the thought.
Well, and I want to pick up one quick thing, and then I would love to open this because this was just, as you said, getting to see it performed versus reading it and having to quasi-imagine. Pain, though, I wrote down, those were the first two things I wrote down, were pain and isolation.
Yeah.
All these characters are in pain and isolation. And what's really so ironic, I guess is maybe the word, as a Protestant who went to a Catholic university, graduated from Catholic university, my sister attended two Catholic universities. So between us, we went to Notre Dame, Georgetown, and Creighton. Okay, and so suffice to say, it's like, and to think about Catholic and being of the body, and the communal body, and the connected body, yet there was this, you know, and I've read a few things about the playwright that the playwright has spoken to. The fact that this is his background of a Catholic, you know, university in his family, the administrators and such. But I would so love to hear like what your bodies, or if you responded to, or how you felt about this. Like I said, these notions of the body and of isolation. Yes.
Regarding the character who was living through a disability and in perpetual pain, she compared her condition to that of anybody who is LGBT. And it's like, y'all just gotta suck it up. I have to suck it up. You guys have to suck it up too. I thought, as much as most of the people of faith that I know don't quote Hannah Arnett. They aren't really big on Marcus Aurelius. Steve Bannon, they're like, oh, he's that one guy. But that whole thing about you'll have to suck it up, I think that's part of the Midwestern consideration. One part Calvinism, one part sheer determination, one part of, hey, we are the children of pioneers that were lucky if they had aspirin to make it through pain. And so they don't really, I think, reflect or care that much about, they're like, you know, it's too bad you're that way. This is your cross to bear. You'll get more jewels in your crown in the next life.
And even more so, I mean, and in kind of drawing that out as well, when Emily's mother says, well, and you wonder why we don't think this is real, which of course had been so explicated in this, the trans and the they and the this and this disparaging, dismissive, you know, what's this even supposed to be? And I just was, and I will say with great, you know, between that paradigm of body as well as that, for lack of a better way, that almost need for an exorcist that Emily has when she starts becoming, oh my God, Octavia,
She became the lady.
Tiffany. And she becomes Tiffany and is saying, you know, it was just very, it was mind-boggling. But I do love that kind of seeing these connections, and especially how we think, what our mindsets are, you know, this goal of we want reason, and it's like, yeah, but what is reasonable when you're looking at issues and dismissing them altogether? I mean, you're dismissing someone's truth. Where does reason fit in there then, you know?
But can I say too, something that you said in terms of, that I think is a really, important part of the dramaturgy of the play is the concept of understanding or comprehending something as being real, and then dismissing it, right? Because I think that what the play actually forces, not invites, but forces the audience to do is to encounter and confront these ideologies, right? Because I don't know any people like this. I don't have people like this in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And the play for 2 hours straight just sucks you into both this completely isolated area and then also just like inside of the expanse, right?
Yeah.
And they're living, you know, under the heavens, and then this tiny little speck, and it's just so, the world is so big and so small, right? And I think that, and I do mean to make a generalization, but I think that a lot of plays are not representative of that kind of ideology, and I think that the play itself represents an echo chamber that we have cordoned ourselves off from, and it is really kind of incredible to witness it, almost as an exhibit, right?
Absolutely.
Because it's just so as unbelievable and easily dismissible as my personal, you know, or your personal lived experiences are to people like that, them to me the same way.
Yeah.
Right? So it's just really,
And how about the realness of that mysterious cacophony? What was up, and the times that it sprang up? I'm like, okay, I have a great suspension of disbelief, so that one's just like, yeah, I didn't go, yeah, I gotta go. Because there was one thing reading about that, the noise, and then when I know that it's like, oh no, I don't know where that noise is, so I'm like, yeah, I gotta go. This is just too freaky, this is too weird, because it was tied to too many things that were like, you know, that they really resonated when, oh my gosh, when Kevin runs out. Yeah, when
I think he gets raptured.
yeah, exactly, yeah, I mean, you just, and so in that sense, when, you know, so I think, yes, reality, and what is reality? And did like, so for you all, like, you've mentioned already about like friends that I know that, you know, could feel, but we are, I mean, I'd say, I can't say for all of us, some of us from other places like Arizona, but some of us Nebraska nice people who've been here most of our lives, we just don't talk about these things. But what were some of your thoughts as far as the themes you saw, even the ideas of reality? What'd you think that noise was? Because I did go back to Lost, the TV show Lost a little, and like, damn it, it's that black smoke. And it's gonna come and suck, you know, and turn into something else. Yeah, that noise just freaked me
Yeah,
out.
I didn't think that noise meant anything, to be honest. I really did. I just thought it was just to be dramatic in the play.
Mm-hmm.
For me.
Mm-hmm.
And then when he says, oh no, I think it's, you know, it's some
There was a
whatever evil
being,
force or whatever
I had a
it
priest
was.
come and bless this house because I felt a presence. And so that's an interesting, that is a very, very interesting. And as a playwright, of course, blows my mind. It's like things that I think, or you know, I might be thinking of, as because I'm sketching some stuff right now. When I came here, I was working on visuals for a play I'm doing, notwithstanding a certain colleague who is partner to a set designer. But no, but all kidding. I think that's amazing, and because of how diametrically different that was. Like, you're like, yeah, it was a thing, versus me like, holy moly. You know, I mean, I knew it was an effect, but what is this thing in this world that I have let myself enter into?
I I'm always inspired by the things that you say, and I want to jump in.
We're just a great
So I think that also the concept of meaning and meaninglessness, right? Like that has roots in theater of the absurd. And you know, as a dramaturgical device, like I think about Beckett and Endgame, and just like the same isolation of that world, right, and the expanse beyond it, and whether or not the characters inside of that space believe there is something beyond. I mean, they talk about it too. I keep gesturing as if they're there.
Exactly. Yes.
They talk about whether or not their bodies and souls have meaning, and somehow having meaning makes things more difficult. But then for some people, they then, in terms of the way that the play structures, ideologies binaristically, they either surrender their hearts to God, or they, like bathe in the hedonism of their, secular identities, right?
Those urban temptations.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think that the idea that the generator sort of also love this idea that like meaning or meaninglessness is like housed inside of that is generative, right?
And in dialogic.
Yeah.
And I know that there was a thing at the beginning, since we read the play, and did any of you, have you, or, so when you read the play, you read the play, did you?
Dear.
The issue of a fugue, and kind of this this musical kind of like collaboration, etc. Another couple of things I wrote down that I think kind of tie in, but I'm sorry to say I'm blanking on who said it, but this notion of a non-person, like someone being a non-person. And then I really couldn't get past that deer at the beginning being Emily throughout, at least as a paradigm and as a, I wanted to gut, and this is something that Justin did all the time, it seems like. It's like, I've always been able to gut a deer, but now I can't. And then when Emily's like, can you carry me? It's like you carried that deer. And so just thinking about what beings are in our world, and I was very curious about what Fly thought because of some of her work that I'm blessed to be familiar with because we're on a playwright cohort. But as far as like animals and then humans as animals, and how that kind of works in a dramatic arena.
Well, and I think too, I was very curious and aware of then the space of the deer, right? Sort of deer space. And, Kevin has this moment of the bodily fluid and like collapsing into the space as well. And Justin is he also collapses into the space and is fixated on the space, right? And it's sort of really interesting. For like no good reason, I know a little bit about what it takes to gut that kind of animal. And the first thing that you have to do is take out its viscera in a really, really grotesque way, and it's very particular and nuanced, and it's actually the part of an animal's body that like gives you nourishment and also air, and it's really the only open space in your body, right? And to be able, and so I think that again, coming back to this idea of the connection of the body and the soul, or the body and the mind, or the body and the self, right? And the apprehension that the play begins with of, again, confronting perhaps, because a deer is just a deer. A deer doesn't consider itself to be anything more than a deer that we know of, right?
That we're aware of at this point. Yes.
Right. I don't know that there are any known deer, theisms.
Or metaphors.
You know what I mean? And so it's just simply, there's no meaning. There's no meaning to it. And so I think that the play opens with this concept of like really having to go in and open up what it means to be alive, which I think that is terrifying no matter what you believe in.
Yeah.
It just so happens that I think that this mode of thinking is not very reflective while also at the same time being incredibly navel-gazing.
Yes.
And the navel-gazing of that moment that permeates the rest of the play,
Yeah.
I think is.
I just watched a short film that Julia Louis-Dreyfus and her husband Brad Hall did called Picture Paris. And if you get a chance to see it, I watched it on some free streaming thing that had an ad in the middle of it. I'm gonna tell you, you're gonna be like, what? Like you're gonna, if you watch it in enough connection to this, not at all alike. Don't expect, but it's super funny and super twisted. So anyway, which is right up in my alley. I think that I also flash back to, did anyone see the film Get Out? Where the film is, I think, hit or killed at the beginning of that film. And it's like there is something about, obviously, they're very symbolic, very much, you know, I've been doing a ton of, and I shouldn't even admit this, stolen my student, oh, we're recording this. Students, I do my grading first before I watch, before I do all of the New York Times, not only the crosswords, but the archives that I've been getting into. I'm horrified to say. But yeah, Deer and Stag, and it's just a very resonant in every sense. And I think especially in all religions and in the reality of survival, you know, and then the numbers of like the random kind of gun firing that you would hear, the random in the sense that we don't have a connection to what, and then, oh my gosh, you know, an eclipse. You know, I don't know how many of y'all got to, you know, be out. I was outdoors with the eclipse, the solar eclipse a few years back, and that was just, then it got literally cold. But I just, yeah, what other things or what things were you kind of curious about, or yes?
I, excuse me, I came into this play fairly cold, except for the blurb about it. And I really appreciate the deep dive you all are making into it in terms of symbols and the deeper meanings of the deer and all of that. I have to say, I didn't experience any of that. Mainly because I was so fascinated by the debate, the conversation, the characters. And so I really appreciate kind of getting that extra layer. I'll certainly think on that. But I was surprised that how much I agreed with them.
Yeah.
Oh,
And,
it was
and
very
that they were
selective.
coming from such, they were all in the same sort of, under the same sort of umbrella, but each representing very different people. And I really liked that they could debate it. It wasn't just this isolated group of alike thinkers. And so I was pleased that some of the things that I had questions about, they were questioning. You know, so
I agree with you, yes.
Well, and to your point, they're focusing most on the Republican side and, you know, that mindset and how they're having those issues of where is this party going? Democrats have the same issue. They've got the same issues, just different talking points in some ways. And yet at the same time, the same talking points.
And it's easy to lump, just like they're saying, lump everybody into one
Yeah.
side or the other. And that's what I appreciate about the play is these characters were not lumped
Yeah,
that way.
Especially
individually.
using that being devil's advocate now, I'm gonna talk about this, you know, it helped open up that as well. And add even more richness to that.
Yeah, the hyper-intellectualization of the academic community overlaid with this notion of grace,
Yes.
overlaid with tremendous judgmentalism.
Yeah.
Themselves. And I hadn't, until you mentioned the deer, tied in that whole communion sacrifice thing and the gestures of crucifixion
Mm-hmm.
early on. It is just wild.
Mm-hmm.
I find the play to be incredibly, what's the word? Can't think of it, but it's related to astrology. But it, and it also has to do with deer. Anyway, but I think that yes to everything you said, and then I think I'm in my own individual interests particularly interested in systems and structures, especially as they relate to meaning and belief. And so I think that. I always go back to the title of the play, right? Here's the fourth turning, the whole really very astrological concept of turnings, right? And I think that, to your point as well, that they are in fourth turning, but they've just really gotten it all wrong in terms of who is against who, right? I think that it is I think that their situation of crisis is much more insular than they think it is.
Yeah. Especially when you've got representatives of those,
Exactly.
according to that theory of, with Emily's mother, Gina, with Justin, with Kevin, and Emily and Teresa, and I think that encounter, and I think going back to it, like going way back now, I think to where we were kind of talking about before this, we panelists and Barry were chatting about things like erasure and a like that kind of dismissive. This really isn't even something worthy to talk about. It's either this or that. It's that or this. It was so. It was really. It made that last, I'd say, monologue. That kind of exorcist monologue thing, where it really, to me, in an interesting way, to put it at the very end, versus where it took seemingly like that much to get her to share it, almost like it was really going to, as someone who was sort of the peacemaker, and I love you all, and I love you, and I want you to love us, and we all need to be in love, and so I felt like that was, it's another one of the benefits, I guess, to getting to see something performed, because you're getting that time over space, happening, and you're getting to kind of get and layer and see and connect. And of course, if you saw it again, or if you saw it and then read it or whatever, what would stick out and you would notice. But it was such a, it was so intriguing, I think, especially going back to what you were saying, Fly, about real, and I think what they said or we've said about truth, because even going to where you're saying about these are the things that maybe on a certain political party Republicans are discussing and the Democrats are too, and if you bring back the gaze even further and say, how are we to be with each other as humans? Are we, and that notion of, that just brought up this entitlement, and it's like, well, what was going on there? There's the debate that we're having, but the additional factors that could have been brought in, but wouldn't be brought in because there was no one kind of representing that side. And even when Gina says, a little bit racist, and well, yeah, and then they use that against us, and we're just so this, and it was very, very interesting and I think it was a great. I'm so glad that I was able to push through my initial, what did Barry say to me? And then I'm like, okay, calm down. And I immediately am like, Barry, we gotta talk, because I just don't. But I am very proud of myself, because it really did help me. It got me seeing and thinking about things in ways that, yeah, it's rare to get that level, because nowadays we get so much. And it was such hard binaries. Just like, it's like, you are this or that, and that is it. It's like, holy moly. And then when they finally did use the word nuance, but it was like, yeah, it was, but it wasn't, I don't think it was deceptive binary. I think it was just, the number of times that I'd hear someone say, well, 99% of, I always think if I'm grading a student's paper, it's like, and that's based on what data? I'm always like, and where'd you get that from? And can you tell me this? So, but in this, in a play, and as people are discussing, and there is very naturalistic language, and those are those kind of like hyperboles you leap to, Everybody knows, or 99.9%.
It's just facts, Peggy.
It's just the facts. Thank you, sir. Look it up. Look it up.
Well, I think that, to something that you just said about having to endure the piece, I think that's why Will Arbery was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize.
Yep, that's right.
I think that there's something really unique that
Very much so.
theater, that the format of performance can offer us,
Yes.
in allowing us a brave entry point into really dissecting, not to go back to the animal, right, but to dissecting these things, right? Because I did feel the bristle on my back
Oh,
when,
yeah,
you know, when they are discussing things that are very hateful to just me,
Well,
or, you know, like,
hateful and I think for me, both as ally as well as, you know, when I felt like erased, when I felt like, but I think for me it was almost worse than hate. It was, they don't even really exist, and why are they even getting to talk? And it was like creatures amongst these real humans, you know, and that was that was hard to see, but and of course, in a lot of ways, I'm like, but one of those people's my friend, and she's saying horrific things. It's like, she is a good actor. She is acting well, because I don't like that person, but I still like that my friend. But suffice to say, it is really, it speaks so much to the magic of, you know, when we get to experience and then share collectively, you know, the C word of collectivism about, you know, an experience and what's going on in the world. Yes.
I just want to underscore, Peggy, something you said, which was like, how are we supposed to be together as humans?
Yeah.
How are we supposed to do that?
And what I go back to often when I find myself, and it didn't even occur to me until just this second, but I'm going to say 5-6 years ago in the New York Times, they had a great little quiz thing where it was like, how do you talk to that uncle at Thanksgiving? And let's think of the New York Times readership, which is, that uncle is the Trump voter, the this, the that, why can't those people, blah, blah, blah. And there was all about, it was about listening, it was about finding commonalities, it was about, for God's sake, can we look at some of that 99.5%? Can we look at the fact that as the human experience is one that and even more in a pandemic, has trepidation, has fear, has, you know, ways that we used to be able to connect, but now we're not even able to. So looking for those connections and seeing if we can make them
I
work.
don't think Trump cared about this.
Oh, no. Oh, yeah, no. Oh, please, yeah. Fight, yeah.
No, I'm just,
Oh, absolutely. No, absolutely. I think like I had a discussion once with a elder in an older faculty member in a different department I was in once, and I said, do Black conservatives really like Black people? She goes, oh no, yeah. She goes, I believe they absolutely do. That's the route that they feel is going to help us the most as people. And when she said it that way, I went, wow. I was just really, it really helped open me to even that reality. I'm not saying I was like, oh well then, but rather I went, okay, if I take it, like we will say when I'm teaching, and I'll bet Fly might do this when they're teaching, as far as we're gonna have a safe brave space. We are gonna have some rules of, or at least some guidelines to follow. So if somebody gets their feelings hurt, they can say ow or ouch. And in that person, we always allow that we're here at a learning community. We are here to learn. We're going to presume good intent. And if someone does get, you know, if someone does start fleeing ad hominem attacks or something, it's like, oh, no, that's not gonna go. And so I think when you ask, Barry, how do we relate to each other as humans? I think that thing from that article, after you did the quiz about talking to your uncle at Thanksgiving, they then had some of these things I'm now talking about, you know, finding commonalities. And when someone speaks to you, you really listen. You're not just waiting for your turn to tell them why they're wrong, but rather you listen and then you reflect, like, that seems to really bother you. Is that the case? Yes. You know, I'm really bothered by this. And not them, but rather another, you know, finding ties that can help us tie, but also be aware that sometimes one must just say, give me a minute, you know, or I'm gonna need to have a drink. Or, you know, it's not to say this is always at the ready, but it is something that you must practice. It has to be a practice. It can't be, I don't think, unless you are an otherworldly being, which is what my latest play is about. Because that is my projection of, I'm so human that I can't even manage these things that these other folks have. So they can't be human because I can't even figure out how they're doing it. So suffice to say, I think it's about finding those connections and allowing for, oh my goodness, human frailty and messing up. And oh wow, that really did hurt my feelings, and can I step back from this? And if they apologize, can I accept it? You know, versus being the little Black woman who raised me with my father, my tall sweet father and my mother, oh, never mind. But she'd have been like, never forgive, never forgiven, and I was like, I think I'm gonna have to forgive him. But yeah, it's you gotta fight nature and nurture sometimes.
You can also, I just want to send it back to Fly for a second. There's this there's a war coming. The world's breaking. This generator is all the things. The stars are going out. The gunshots are on the horizon. This sense of catastrophe, right around the corner. And some people see it and some people don't. Some of the characters notice it and some people don't. And that's the same, I feel with our communities right now. Some people are like, oh no, it's war, everything's life and death. And also there's some people who are like, oh, let's just ignore this, it'll go away, it'll be fine. And that sort of, they're competing cosmological fucking viewpoints that have to exist in the universe together. And what do we do about that?
Find the middle.
What do we do about that?
Ooh, I don't know what you did Barry to get that question.
That's assuming though there are only two things.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's true. So the couple things. The first thing that comes to mind, which I think is pretty hilarious, is that it's sort of unforgivable to Mr. Arbery in a lot of ways, but the characters in the play speak repeatedly about their disdain of empathy, and by the end of the play, I have bucketfuls of empathy for these people, and they're not wrong about specifically the way that I feel about them and how that makes them feel, right? They're not wrong about that.
Yeah.
Right.
The second thing that I have to say to your impossible question is that I'm reading this book about trees. This is related. And that trees that are planted inside of a monoculture, so like in industrial agricultural fields, in orchards, along the streets of Omaha, they are separate from other trees, right? Whereas trees that are growing in forests in the wild naturally have communication systems through their root infrastructures that they care for each other and share information through, and not to anthropomorphize trees, but through electrical impulses and chemical.
But these are the biological
Right, yeah,
realities of plant life.
there's other forms of communication than language, right? And allowed to grow naturally together, even though they are competing for resources, or even if there are other smaller plants who are not aware of the larger issues at hand, they're a part of a community that depends on one another, whether they know it or like it or not. Whereas when they're specifically structured to be separate for what we perceive to be gain and perhaps repair, like we talk a lot about reforestation, or that's a word, right? Yeah, reforesting. It's not so much as simple as planting a tree, right? I'm very into nature. I don't know if you can tell. Anyway, so that is to say is that I think that the answer lies in community and conversation and art, and maybe like a walk in the woods. I don't know. That's what, which is what I think Kevin really essentially goes off to do, and not to plug a show later in BLUEBARN season, right? But I find that moment very Lear, in which the holy fool of the play gets lost in a storm, right? And then everything goes to shit. So, oops, recording. I don't know if I'm allowed to swear. Anyway, that's my answer to that question.
And I think, and it brings me to the King quote about we are in this, inescapable web of mutuality. We can't get away from it if we wanted to. So it's like we have so much evidence that we are connected. We survive connectedly. If we try to break or sever or ignore those connections, it's not usually a good thing, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we're always going to see the connections the way others see them. Also, it's bringing me back to mind of that, oh my gosh, years and years ago, and it's kind Oh, it's one of those Attenboroughs. I want to say David Attenborough, the one who did the nature film series, and it had all those like seeds. It was like the work, like how nature kind of works, and these seeds, like they get eaten by this bird, and then when he poops, it comes out here, and then it grows this plant there, and this happens there. It's just kind of like, yeah, it is absolutely, you know, it can be, for me especially, a spiritual experience. You know, and it was so beautiful. It was so aesthetically gorgeous. And so I think these are just the things that, yeah, notwithstanding Mr. Carmen's wonderful question, oh boy, you need to, I don't know what you did to him, but what's the meaning of life, Fly? So anyway, trees are the meaning of life.
There, okay. Do we have any more questions
Yes.
from the audience?
I just wanted to say that this play reminds me of so many unacceptable things that have happened under Trump. Like, I think one that was really, I think so many Americans accept that so peacefully when Melania with her robe saying, "Who cares?"
I don't really care, do you?
I
Or
don't
something.
really care.
Yeah.
How come a first lady
Yeah.
can do that
I
and nothing happens?
because, and,
But so much of what he did too.
yeah.
I mean, he did so many things that he should have been able to do. He was impeached twice. Twice!
Yeah. I think for me too, it was like, like I was just telling someone the other day, it's like, yeah, I guess probably on November, I can't remember the election day, whatever, but it was like the next day I was like, well, checks and balances, blah, 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 not knowing the way things were gonna transpire. But I think also, it's the day that I kind of, that I'm coming back from was, and I don't know why this happened, because honestly, I am more, I view things like, I tend to be pretty, and it's easy for me to do it with my subscription. I watch the PBS NewsHour. I tend to watch or I read like, ProPublica or etc. But the day that I happen to watch C-SPAN of all things, so I'm not a C-SPAN viewer, but I happen to catch C-SPAN or a replay of C-SPAN where someone asked, at the time, Sean Spicer, press secretary, something, and when he responded, and then the reporter who said it goes, "You want me to pull the quote?" And I'm like, "Holy crap! We've gone through the looking glass," because I have never before. I mean, that let me know. Just like it really irritated me to no end to hear. Well, conventional wisdom is like, oh, we are not in conventional times. We are in a new. We may just like we think with the pandemic that we may go back to or whatever. But I think humans we get in such wonderful like. Sort of somewhat comfort zones that when something blows us like what the what, like I still can't believe that we had 17,000 fewer cases, 17 times fewer cases of the flu because of all the things that happened in conjunction. Now this year they're like, yeah, but now blah 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 blah. That's like it boggles the mind, and so I think you can if you're of the mindset that says, come on, y'all. I'm just kind of saying this stuff. I didn't really think anyone would, you can kind of do an aw shucks or whatever. There are those who find that utterly charming and others who find that downright evil. And ironically enough, in this play where we saw, like when Kevin's character says, which I, had read and I was curious to see how it would get staged and played, after I voted, I went and vomited. And I'm like, part of me, wanted to say, well, what did that tell you? If this had been like a different kind of like, if Arbery had said, you could have the audience yell things at the actors on
There's
stage.
actually no rule against that. You can always yell.
You really could, yeah. I just really, there were things that just really kind of like, oh my gosh, I mean, the worst I've ever felt is like, I guess the whole hold your nose and vote thing, but I've never been physically ill. But again, I'm one person with one life experience, with one narrative, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, I think that's what the play does, is it prevents us from forgetting.
Yes,
Because I think it already, and it has not been that long,
Mm-hmm.
is getting swept under the rug, right?
Mhm.
So
Even as certain narratives keep not going away.
I think that plays are a product of their time,
Yeah.
and I think that hope that the play continues to get done
Yeah,
as evidenced, right?
absolutely, absolutely. And thank you, Blue Barn, for
Oh,
taking on this
congratulations.
great